Hello and welcome to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. My name is Natalie Himmelrich. How to Deal with Grief and Trauma is completely self-funded, produced and edited by me, Natalie Himmelrich. Consider making a small donation to support the podcast. Go to bit.ly/support, capital G, capital T, and podcast. I repeat, bit.ly/supportgt podcast. Thank you so much. And for more information, please visit Natalie's website, join the podcast Instagram page, and subscribe to the newsletter to receive updates on future episodes. Welcome to a special series of podcast episodes in honor of the 10th anniversary of my first book, Grieving Parents, Surviving Loss as a Couple, published in 2014. To mark this milestone, I'm reconnecting with the same parents I initially interviewed for the book, offering a unique opportunity to revisit their stories and gain a deeper understanding of their journeys, now with the perspective of a decade's time. In recognition of October being Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month, this series is dedicated to showcasing how grieving parents have coped with their losses and trauma over these years. These episodes aim to offer a long-term view of life after the loss of a pregnancy or an infant, providing comfort, insight and hope to those who may still be navigating their own grief. Additionally, I'm excited to offer Healing Steps, my audio course, at 25% off this month. Use the coupon code HSOCT24, I repeat HSOCT24, to access the course and begin your own journey towards healing. So welcome everyone to another episode in the series of Grieving Parents a Decade Later. And today I've got Alexa here with me. And with Alexa, something interesting connects me because both of our stories have a lot of similarities. And for me at the time, I remember, oh my God, I felt as if I was the only person who lost one twin and had a surviving twin to raise. And so I met Alexa, and her story, as you're just going to find out, is somewhat parallel to mine. So I was very glad to have a sparring partner in that sense of finding someone that could actually come from the same experience. But I'm going to start by letting you, first of all, tell a little bit about your story, and then we're going to look back over the past 10 years and what has happened in those 10 years for you and for myself.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me back. It's hard to believe it's been 10 years since we did your project, but I found out I was pregnant with identical twins in May or June of 2011. And it was kind of a funny story because it was our third pregnancy. My ex-husband and I were both the third of four children, and we were like, we have to have a third child, like it's got to happen. But it was our third time. So I went to the doctor by myself and, was very surprised when they told me that there were two heartbeats. Very long medical journey and story later. Just the basics of it is, at about 20 weeks, we found out that they had twin-to-twin transfusion syndrome. And one of them was already stage 4, which meant she was already building up fluid inside of her body. And basically, it didn't look good. I was hospitalized on and off over the course of the next 9.5 weeks. We had multiple procedures to try and help the babies. They were born. I was bedridden at the hospital for over a month. And then they were born 9.5 weeks early with Kathryn weighing 4.5 pounds because of all the extra fluid in her body. And then my little one weighing 1 pound, 10 ounces. She's a little fighter. We spent 84 days in the NICU with the little one, and she came home after having a G-tube placed. But beyond that, is almost 13 years old and is perfectly strong and perfectly healthy. In fact, I often wonder if she somehow absorbed the soul of her sister when her sister died 2 days after they were born, because she has so much personality. I don't even know what I could have done with two of them if they both had that much personality. But I mean, she is truly a joy. And, I'm so grateful to have her. I don't know if you want me to tell. That's the story of our
Mm.
loss. I don't know if you want to where you want to go from here. If you want to tell me to tell the whole story, or
Well, it's interesting to listen to you because, as you just shared, we haven't spoken in quite a bit of time intervening in this decade.
yeah,
But I said at the beginning that some of our story is parallel, and now listening to you speak about your almost 13-year-old girl, and for those people who listen to my podcast, they know that I also had identical twins, and they were born in September 2011. So my surviving twin just turned 13 in September. And when you were saying about her having so much personality, like my daughter, I sometimes say she's two in one. And I mean, she has ADHD, and maybe because of that, but also I think it's somehow that she's the thing that I would want to say, she's like bigger than one. That
yeah,
just was at the back of my mind. I also don't want to put something in her that she's not, but it's about me and our feelings, how we feel about our children. And I think our losses are really a different kind than another person's loss, because we have a child and we've lost a child. So for me, this was the first pregnancy, but we're straddling this situation where we have a loss, but also the joy of another one. And it's this balance. Now, in your case, you had two children before, so this was your third pregnancy. So how was that for you, knowing how you were as a mother of a young baby, and then having this situation where obviously there was grief and there was joy?
yeah.
Can you remember how that was for you?
I remember it a lot actually, because this is as we're recording this on October 31st, like this is my window of memories, if you will. It was shortly after this point in time that that we were basically told it was not going to be a good outcome. And in this window of time, we were being offered decisions like whether or not we should terminate the baby who was taking all the extra fluid to save my survivor. I did not choose to go that direction. It was in early November that I was admitted, actually around this time frame that I was admitted to the hospital and stayed in the hospital for the next month. I mean, there's just so many emotional ties to this time of year. They weren't supposed to be born until February. I turned 35 on December 9th, and they came very unexpectedly on December 10th. So I share my birthday basically with my survivor. And then of course, Kathryn's date of death was 12/12. So 2 days after that. So this time of year is just packed with memories, but it's super interesting because it's a blessing that it was my third pregnancy, not my first, because one of the things that the doctor told me was with the amount of fluid that we were taking on, if it had been my first pregnancy, there's a good chance that I could have lost both babies because my body just couldn't have handled that expansion the way it did. But because it had done it twice before, so there's a blessing in that. But the downside was that I had a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old at home, and I was having a really difficult time in the hospital. Remember, I missed my other two children so much. And my 1-year-old, she actually turned 2 weeks after the twins were born. She, started speaking really early, and she would come to the hospital, and even though she wasn't even 2, we would carry on these conversations, and she'd call the hospital mommy's house and was always asking to come visit mommy at mommy's house, which is crazy. The hospital was mommy's house. But, it was this strange, desire for the pregnancy to be over no matter what the outcome, because I missed my other two children so much. And also, of course, this intense desire to protect both babies and do whatever needed to be done. And, we saw the writing on the wall as things weren't necessarily done, but I saw the difference in how they were approaching my pregnancy and the plan for after the fact. And I kind of knew they anticipated that Kathryn would not make it, but I remained so hopeful all the way till the end that we would get some kind of, miracle or something, out of that situation. So there were just so many. And then to your point on how incredibly difficult it is to ever get the chance to grieve when you're also so grateful that you have this other baby. And of course, you know, with her having all the medical issues that she had, like, it was kind of a good thing. I didn't have time to think about my grief because I was just making sure that she was going to survive for the first couple months, because her road was hit or miss for a little while. And then it became, you know, all the appointments that she had and all the things that we had to do to take care of her. And now I'm back at home with 3 kids, 5 and under, and life was just intense. But I remember in some of the conversations that I had with people after the fact that I remember more than one person telling me, at least you got to bring one home. And honest to God, I just wanted to punch them in the face when people made that comment, because I was like, don't you dare strip me of the grief that I have earned and deserve. I held my baby as she died, you know, so please don't ever tell me anything about you're so lucky. No, my friends, there was no luck. So I've let a lot of that anger go over the years. And I, one of the things when we talk about what's happened in 10 years is that I have realized, especially in the United States, we're just horrible with grief. We just really are terrible. But I know that people are trying to say and do, they're trying to comfort. And sometimes the wrong words come out. People don't know what to say. And that's what a lot of my work in the beginning was around, those types of conversations. Like, if you don't know what else to say, here's some things you can say, or here's some things that you can do to help, instead of being one of those people that, you know, makes a suggestion like, well, you can get a dog. It's like, no. So yeah.
Yeah, especially that sentence that you just mentioned. I've heard it as well. At least you had one and she's healthy. And yes. I think to add to what you were saying is, like, if I imagine that sentence to be uttered by a lost mom who had a pregnancy or had a stillbirth or had a miscarriage, that I can understand. Yes, for her, it's like she has the empty arms, which I don't have. And it's still not the solution.
Right.
And it's important for people to know that, yeah, even though we have one, it's not like it doesn't fill the hole of the other one.
No, and you're 100% on that. And I don't want to come across as insensitive to the mother who had empty arms, because I completely understand that too. And I will even say I was so incredibly grateful that I didn't come home with completely empty arms. But it's still, so it's a weird position to be in, because you don't want to, you know, take away from others and their experiences either. But at the same, you know, that's the thing about grief, right? That we all experience it differently, but we all experience it. And some people are better at dealing with it. I have friends who lost children, babies in the same time frame that almost 13 years later still are not moving on. They're still in the same place that they were, or close to, you know, a long time ago. So grief is complicated.
So in your case, you mentioned before that you didn't have time to grieve because you obviously had this newborn and she was hit and miss in the beginning. So when did you take your time? When did you give yourself the space to grieve, Kathryn? How did that work in all this time, especially also with 3 children at home at that time?
Yeah, well, I started looking, once I had the time to be able to get back on social media and do some things. I was connected with a few TTTS groups, one of them for complete loss, one of them for loss of one and not the other. And I started making some friends in that space who completely understood me, completely, from the whole thing. They understood twin-to-twin transfusion. They understood NICU time. They understood losing one. And that made me realize that I was probably ready for some type of grief support group. So at about 9 months after the loss, I found out about a local group, Naomi's Circle, that supports grieving mothers. And I went to that group and I shared my story, and I just cried and I cried and I cried and I cried. And with other moms who cried with me, and I cried with them, you know. So it was it took 9 months before I finally like started going out. And then after that point in time, when I realized how much I needed that, I sought out other grief support groups, one that my church ran, and, really just became as integrated as possible as I could. That had upsides and downsides. For me, it was everything. It helped so much to be around people who understood. But it started to, really break. My ex-husband and I were already having troubles before this happened, but we saw it really, really expand at this point in time because he did not want to talk about it. He did not want to go to groups. He did not want to be part of that. And I was putting all of my time and energy into that because I needed it. So that, developed a whole different side of the challenge to it. And yeah, that was not easy. But what happened then, though, was that I didn't like to be in the pain of grief. I needed to do something. So I started doing something. I started writing about it. I started a blog for twin-to-twin transfusion syndrome largely, and talking about infant loss and pregnancy loss and all of those types of things. And then after, when my survivor was 18 months old, a close friend of mine delivered a stillborn baby at 8 months. And that's what really pushed me forward to put together a book for Grieving Mothers, because I didn't feel like the resources were out there. And I wanted to be able to give something to her that was like, I can't do anything for you, but I can give you this book that might help you by seeing that you're not alone, and by reading other stories, and by just doing that small thing for her. So that set my life on a whole different trajectory.
I quickly want to circle back to you speaking about your ex-husband, because two of the quotes that I picked for the book from our conversation that we had more than a decade ago. One was, "It was difficult communicating with my husband because we had such different styles of handling the situation. I wanted to talk about the situation and he didn't." Mm-hmm. And another quote that you said also in regards to the support groups, you said, "The support groups really helped me understand my husband's way of grieving. I've learned that men turn to something they can control as a way of grieving." So it's interesting that you mentioned that, and that's still in as a memory of that time. And I think, as you know, from the first book that I wrote, and which is about the way we met, was that men and women, or let's say, it not necessarily gender specific, but people have different ways of grieving. And if those two ways are not being met or understood or accepted, it can lead to challenges. Now, you mentioned, and I think that's a question in many people's minds, as there's these high numbers of divorce rates after loss. And you mentioned your ex-husband, but you also said we had challenges before that already. So I think the burning question on people's mind listening to this is, did the loss cause the divorce, or how was that related to the loss? Do you want to share a little bit about that?
That's hard to answer because so many things. Can I say that the loss caused the divorce? No, I don't believe that it did. I mean, he and I have had issues all throughout. And to give him credit, he tried to support me in the way that he could. I mean, he went with me on, we do an annual walk for infant and pregnancy loss in Colombia. He went with me to those things. Like, he went with me to sell, it wasn't like he was just like, "I'm not dealing with this. You have to do it all on your own." But inside the home, when I needed that emotional support from him, he didn't want to have those conversations. So what I can tell you that it did do was not being able to talk to him kind of forced my hand to make new friendships and new relationships other places. And these were not romantic. These were with women. Like I wasn't like out there, like, that could be misinterpreted there. But what it did was it gave me a place where I felt my feelings being reciprocated, where I felt understood. And so in the times where I might have been spending time with him, namely the evenings or, weekends, I would spend time with them, either on Facebook groups or text messages or going to things or whatever. And so it further placed a divide between us that we just kept going our own separate ways. But really where things got really bad was when I decided to basically start a business around helping people publish their books and writing through grief and writing to heal, and how that evolved. And so I think he felt that the contract of our marriage was maybe a little bit violated because I was supposed to be home with the kids and doing all of these things. And as I had other things that took away my attention, it caused more and more tension between us. So, I mean, we'd obviously have to ask him where he thinks things went really wrong. But I would guess, just from conversations that we've had, that he didn't feel like he got any attention from me at all. In fact, he said to me, "You're giving all your time and energy to strangers and not to me." So, there's some validity to that. But like with any marriage, it's not just one thing. We had a lot of communications issues. We had a lot of things that caused problems for us. And then the grief on top of that and the things that happened out of that just kind of were the nail in the coffin.
Yeah. I would totally echo what you're saying, because the loss doesn't actually, it doesn't mean that it's causing new problems beside the fact that you have loss that is about the same person, the same
Right.
relationship in terms of parents. You're both the parents of that child, but it actually stirs up all the old ones, or it accentuates the situations that are at hand. And because you're both pulled back to your bare essentials dealing with this significant loss, you're at a place where you have to look after yourself. And that's not necessarily a place where you can then look after one another. And it would still be good in a relationship, but that's not always the possibility that is there. I mean, I interviewed a few of the people that I spoke to a decade ago for the book, and some of them are divorced and some of them are not. So it's not a case of all of them are divorced. That's not the case. But in my case as well, I mean, I got divorced in the last decade, and it's also, I would not say that the loss was the cause. It was something that happened that accentuated what happens when someone is thrown back to where they have to deal with something really significant. How does that work? How does that work its way into the relationship, and what happens with that? Now, tell us a little bit, if you're looking at how the time has shaped your loss, how has your grief changed over all those years? How has it developed in all those years? Just to give people this ability to look into grief at a distance, or grief at a timely span, that so many times people in the throes of raw grief, they feel like it's never going to change. I'm always going to feel like that. I can't imagine it ever getting better. So by doing this, we're looking at, okay, well, what has happened? And in your case, in my case, 13 years. So take us a little bit on a journey.
Well, I can tell you that I no longer consider myself to be grieving. Like, I don't know what you call it after that, but I'm not actively grieving. I live a very happy life in general, and I haven't allowed this to stop me from continuing forward. I didn't expect to get really emotional right there. But the loss is always there. And one of the challenges of having a twin is that it's always in my face, every major milestone. Sorry. See, it's always there. Like, that's the crazy thing about grief, is that it can, even if you're not actively grieving, you can never get over the loss of someone that you love as much as you do a child or a parent or a spouse or whatever that, in this case, obviously we're talking about children. But it doesn't hinder me from having an active and happy lifestyle. And I do not live in that place. I remember those days. I remember the days. And I think about this one particular incident as an example. My daughter, my 2-year-old, had left one of her bottles on the floor, and it leaked out some milk on the floor behind one of our chairs. And I saw that bottle there, and I passed it for like 3 days. Like 3 days I saw it there, and I just didn't have it in me to pick it up and to go get the rag and to clean up the floor. So I just left it there. And some people might say that's gross, like that's, whatever, but that's grief. That's in that moment where you are so overwhelmed by everything. You cannot even sometimes do basic things. And I am not in that place anymore, thank goodness. And I haven't been in that place for a very long, long time. So yes, it does get better. But as much as you don't want to hear it, time does help. It removes that freshness from the grief. It removes the just the searing pain, but it doesn't mean that it will go away. I mean, we have pictures of her. I still always take off December 12th as a day of service. I go to the hospitals. I bring care packages lost care packages to the NICUs. And I still try to do things to give back to others because that brings me so much joy, if you will. I don't like to use that word around this topic, but it helps me. It helps me in a very special way. And, but it's not something, and the funny thing, Natalie, is that I feel guilt around this sometimes. I'm like, what's wrong with you? Like, you lost your child and why are you happy? Like, you can't, but that's, we don't want to stay stuck in that place. So over the years, I've made a very conscientious effort to choose joy every possible way that I can. And it doesn't mean that I've let her go. It doesn't mean that she doesn't matter. It doesn't mean that I won't always miss her. But I also want to make the most of this life. So I've done whatever I can to incorporate her into my life. I named a company after her. My publishing house is Cat Biggie Press after Kathryn Bigwarfe. So she's very much a part of my everyday and everything that I've built from that. But I don't want to stay in grief, and I don't wish that on anyone else because it's so hard and you miss so much of the potential for a beautiful life and the potential to do good and to help others and to move forward even when we drew the short straw.
It's interesting because I'm looking at the third quote that I picked for the book, which is, I chose and made a decision to move on. It was at this time I realized I could do more good at this point by not dwelling in the sorrow than I could if I just stayed in my house and felt sorry for myself. It is not to say that this is not okay. Everybody grieves differently. If that's what works for you, then that's what you need to do. But for me, it didn't work. And then you posed a really interesting question. And the question is, so what is grief? And I have been thinking about this for, I could say, a decade now, as to what do we define as grieving? I'm echoing here David Kessler's words where he says, we want to grieve with more love than pain. And so the way you said that before, it's really interesting, this conversation around what is grieving and what not, and what does it entail? Where do we call it grief and where not? Like for me, similarly to you, I do not actively grieve. I do not have this continuing going on as a painful way for me. Yes, there's times, just like you mentioned, where it comes back. And I heard an interesting metaphor just today in a podcast about grief is like a tiger. It's my tiger, and it's a tame tiger. You tame it, it's still mine, and it can actually still be violent. It's a tiger, and it's there, and it's like for me, it's a beautiful sentence to say, I want to have grief as a company that has taught me so much in my life. And it's something that no one of us can actually avoid. It's on all of our journeys, and most people actually have experienced it already. They might not have called it grief, but everyone has experience with loss sooner or later. If not already, then sooner or later it will happen. Yeah. So you mentioned also a friend of yours who lost a child also in the sort of the same time frame as you. What do you think is happening for people who stay in a painful grief where they can't move? And not to say that this is wrong, but for those people who want to move out of that space, what do you think has happened for you that might not be able to happen for someone else, or someone else hasn't taken a choice that you have?
Well, I think the danger of, there's a bunch of things that happen, right? When you stay stuck in a position is that you don't live life. And for me, I feel that that's I feel it's a horrific tragedy, because now it's more lives lost. And the impact that you have on everyone else around you. I'm very blessed that I had 3 other children to throw my energies behind, and then this budding business and all those types of things to keep myself busy. But you also have to be careful. If you keep yourself too busy and you stuff the grief, then it can also come back to hurt you later. So the best advice that I have for people is to feel it, and to feel it hard, and to do the things that you need to do. If that means staying in your bed for 3 days without getting out, without showering, without whatever, do it. Take the time to do those things that you need to do to feel that pain, and then pick a date, a time, something, and say, okay, starting today, I'm going to do this one thing. And you don't have to have these expectations for yourself that you're going to wake up one day healed. That's not how it works. You don't just decide, I'm going to wake up tomorrow and I'm going to be happy. But you decide, maybe today, instead of doing whatever it is that I did yesterday that kept me there, I'm not going to do that one thing today, or I'm going to add this thing in there, or I'm going to go outside and enjoy nature, or I'm going to go, whatever it is that you choose that you can do. Because what I see happening in the people that are still there is that are still stuck in that, is that it's okay to still be sad about things. One of the people that I'm referring to in particular lost another twin. But it makes me sad to see how sad she continues to be. And you don't know how that's playing out in her life and in her family, and in those situations where it has to come down to choosing, really, because you can easily stay sad for a very long time, and it can actually become like a habit. You just are sad. That's who you are. And so it takes a concerted effort to unsadden yourself, if you will, to make the decisions that will help you move forward. And it won't ever fully go away. And I think that's a fear that a lot of people have, is that if I am not sad, then I'm dishonoring my child and I will forget them. And I just want you to say that out loud to yourself, because it's kind of silly, right? Is there ever a chance that you could ever forget that child? No, you won't. You won't. Just because you're not grieving doesn't mean you're going to forget them. And I'm not trying to make fun of anyone or make light of the situation. I'm saying it because I know and I understand. I remember very much being in that decision-making point where I was like, if I choose not to talk about this again this year, or not to do this, or not to, some of the rituals that I had over the years of things that I would do or places I would go, am I going to forget her? And I decided that was impossible. So, but healing allows me to enjoy life and to make it, and to honor her, and to not let, both of us have gone down with her demise as well. So.
So it's interesting when you spoke, because one of the things that I've added into my field of knowledge or understanding is to be trauma informed. And so in the last decade, and what I have realized is, by listening to you speak, that if someone is, as we call it, or feels or seems to be stuck in grief, from a trauma perspective or from nervous system point of view, they are sort of in the dorsal state, where people are usually depressed, or that's a place where you're collapsed and you're immobilized. And I think for some people that are there, it's very difficult to actually move, because that's the state, that the state of depression, the state of being collapsed is what it is. And so I think it just means a little bit of change as to reach out for someone that can walk beside you, because the benefit of having someone that can walk beside you is, without wanting you, not necessarily, okay, you need to move, you need to change, not wanting to fix them, but just the sheer presence of someone else is co-regulating for the nervous system. And that already is beneficial. That's the reason why grief groups work. Even when you're telling each other the sad story, it's the co-regulation that happens, the breathing together, the sharing. And grief is a community effort. It's something that happens in community. It's something that you happen to share. It's something that needs to be witnessed. And from that trauma lens, it's important for people to understand there needs to be just a pivoting towards some kind of movement. And if a person cannot do that on their own, that's what people like me or other grief support people come into a place where you can say, okay, I can't do this alone. And so many other things we can't do alone, and we need to ask for help.
That's such an important point. And I did not do it alone. And I'm very, very open about this. I sought both community from other people who had gone through it, but I also sought mental health support. And I was on an antidepressant for about 5 years. And I remember when I made the decision to wean off of that because I felt like life was a little bit muted. I didn't feel like I was feeling all the feels, and I wanted to feel everything again, good and bad. And so I reached a point where I felt like I didn't need that level of support, but I'm glad I had it for the time that I needed it. And I've gone through a lot of therapy and sought out things like that. And I do truly believe that talking about your story and writing about your story, I mean, there's an entire trauma therapy that is basically just like spending an hour every day writing your story all the way through over and over and over and over until you can write it without feeling like you're falling to pieces every time you do it. And that to me sounds like a nightmare. And when my therapist told me that was an option, I was like, no, thank you. But I did write my story once. Well, actually, I've written my story many times because I've shared it in lots of anthologies and different books like yours and things like that. But it truly helps. And it gives a legacy. It gives a legacy to your child and to that story, and allows you to keep them alive in a very real way that's not as damaging as heavily grieving all the time.
I was just recently asked to comment for a magazine, Board Panda, about twin loss of one twin. And some of the questions were like, isn't the other child on the birthday, for example, isn't the surviving child forgotten or gets not enough attention, or how to memorialize the lost child. And I was thinking about that, and I think it's an individual thing as well that people need to figure out for themselves, and it will develop over the years. But for those people listening, how do you handle that? How do you handle milestones that are for both? How do you do that?
This has been really, really hard navigating this. And sometimes I get worried that we made Kathryn too much a part of my daughter's life. And I can explain that a minute here. And I don't know what the right answer to do is. I mean, I wanted her to know about her sister. I wanted to know about her situation. And the way that I've tried to incorporate her into that is that we're very active in like the grief walks and supporting those things. Or we were in the first few years, we're active with the March of Dimes and their March for Babies and all of those types of things. And we talk about Kathryn, and we have pictures of Kathryn, and she had a little puppy dog, stuffed animal that someone gave to her right after she was born. And we always called that her Kathryn puppy. And that was always with her when she was little. So we tried to do things like that. And I remember when she was about 3 years old, she was old enough to play out. We had a fenced in backyard. She was old enough to play outside by herself. So I was inside the kitchen, and she came into the house, and I remember her looking at me and saying, "Mommy, I just played with Kathryn." And I was like, "What do you mean you just played with Kathryn?" And she said, "God's hand came down from the sky and Kathryn jumped off, and we played and we swung on the swings together, and then she had to go." I thought that was beautiful, and I encouraged it, and I don't really care what anybody believes about anything. It was a beautiful moment for her and for us, and it was really good. But as the years passed by, I will say that my daughter has some mental health challenges, and I don't know how it's related to anything, if it is, or if it's chemical, I don't know. But at one point in time, Kathryn became scary to her. And when she would have nightmares about her. And at that point in time, I started really evaluating how much we talk about her and where we bring her in, and kind of pulled way back on that. That started when she was about 6 or 7. And it was really sad for me because, well, you can imagine why it was really sad for me, but I've spent a lot of time, trying to make sure that she knows that Kathryn would never hurt her and that she's there, whatever. But then that's a whole long story in itself that we could probably spend hours trying to unpack. But the answer is, I don't think you should ignore it completely. Like, the last thing I would want to do is hide it all. And then one day she finds out that she had a twin sister, and then she feels like she's been lied to her whole life, or something of that nature, but I don't also want to make it so much of her life that she feels like she's not getting, that she feels angry about it. But I do remember, one of the most hurtful things that was ever said to me by someone was, as I was looking for ways to deal with my grief and get involved in these things, I threw myself into March of Dimes advocacy and in raising money for that, and in doing the grief and loss support and all of those types of things. And someone very close to me said that, if I mothered my living children as much as I mothered my dead children, I'd have a happier family, or something to that effect. And that destroyed me. One, I was very angry because they're not in my house every day and didn't see how much time and energy I gave to my children. And I didn't feel that I was ignoring my children to do these other things. It was together, I was doing them in my spare time. When I wrote Sunshine After the Storm, I would stay up till late at night after the kids went to bed, and I would get up at 5 o'clock in the morning before they got up so that I could do that. But, it just comes back to that question of how much is too much. Well, people may judge you harshly for how much you talk about it or what you do or the things you do. But at the end of the day, that was my survival technique. And I can tell you right now that having something to keep me alive every day and to get out of bed every day was better for my children than allowing myself to sink into a grief that I could have if I didn't have something else to focus on too, Yeah. So it's a really, really, really complicated question. And I think it's important for everyone to bring that child into their lives as much or as little as feels right for your family.
Yeah.
And,
Exactly, as you were just saying, as it is right for your family, because I took the stance to nurture or honor and accompany or accompanying myself and my grief. At the beginning, it was more so my grief, because obviously my daughter at the time, she didn't grieve, or right. not that I could see, but there came a time when she did, and to be mindful as to at what stage is she at. Like now she's 13, and her daughter, her sister Amaya doesn't have so much spoken time anymore, and not for me either, but there might come time when it is. And right. I am at the stance right now that I take her lead in that, because for me, I look after myself and my own situation with that. And I, just like you, I take time around the birthday, which is often an interesting time, just not the birthday, but the time around. And whenever it comes up for her, it is her situation as to what to do. I'm going to link that in the show notes, as well as the books that you mentioned and that you wrote, and for people to get that information or those resources. So in order to round this up, what would you want other people to know about what time? I mean, you mentioned it already, but looking back over this decade, what would you want them to know? Not to give advice, but How has time done its work for you? Not that it resolves things. We don't believe in time heals all wounds, but it helps or it does some kind of thing. So if you were to speak about that to finish this up, what would you say?
I would say that it's a combination of time and choices. I started finding things that brought me happiness, whether that was painting my fingernails sparkly colors or wearing sparkly headbands. And those seem like really, really small, stupid things, but they made me feel better to see my pretty nails or I'm not a girly girl. So this was a surprising thing to me that this happened. I tried to, spend more time with girlfriends and to allow myself the time to go to the beach or on a girls' weekend or things like that. And really, incorporating things into your life that are self-care, whatever those are. Self-care varies all the way from, taking in 3 deep breaths when you wake up in the morning to, going to a 1-month yoga retreat. Don't we all dream of doing that, where somebody just takes care of you the entire time and makes sure that you're well nourished all around? That's my dream. But allowing yourself to live, I think, speeds up the process of how long it takes before you don't feel as bad. But I can tell you, and I know you know this from all the people that you have been around and in your line of work, but it truly is a different path for every person. And society tries to tell us that we need to be at these specific places by these timelines or something's wrong with us. I think there's some merit to that. But I don't think it's a specific timeline. I've heard a lot of people say if by the 2-year point you are still grieving so hard you can barely function, then that's probably the time to seek some professional help, because you're going to need someone to help you get to the next step. But, as I look back on the last 13 years, it's ups and downs, and sometimes I feel like I regress a little bit. Sometimes I move forward a whole lot. I went through a phase when my dad was sick and dying that I had to completely walk away from anything related to supporting grieving parents because I just I didn't have the capacity to deal with both. And I remember being very, very fatigued, compassion fatigued. So I would just tell you that, like, your walk is going to be your walk. Your timeline is going to be your timeline. But the one thing that I do know is that you have to actively seek to get better, to feel better, to move forward. If that's your choice to do so. And I really hope that it is. I think that people listening to this are probably of the same mindset as us, that we want to move forward. We want to heal. We want to get better. And I've said it multiple times today, and it's like a broken record, but it has to be your choice on how and when you move forward. And it'll be okay. It will be okay if you choose to move forward. I think that's really important for people to know.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Alexa.
You're welcome.
It's been lovely to catch up with you and hear how your journey has been.
Thank you. I hope this helps.
Thanks for listening to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. If you'd like to be updated on future episodes, please subscribe to my newsletter on nataliehimmelrich.com. If you need grief support, please contact me for a 30 minutes free discovery session. How to Deal with Grief and Trauma is produced and edited by me, Natalie Himmelrich. To support this podcast, please rate, review, and subscribe to or follow the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you. And remember to keep breathing. I promise it will get easier.